We humans have grown cynical about a great many things, but most crucially, about ourselves. The modern outlook of the human race onto itself is predominantly a negative one, mired by cynicism and pessimism. And to be quite honest, why shouldn't it? We continue to fuck our planet relentlessly. Every country in existence is electing bottom-of-the-barrel leaders, and ridiculous, inhumane events have become the norm every day. It's easy and, frankly, very reasonable to turn cynical towards humanity and its doings. And many works of fiction have reflected this outlook in the last 20 or so years. Think back to the last 10 stories you've read or watched, and chances are more than one of them will have had some variation of humans suck as the thematic message. But precisely because it's become such a common mindset, both real and fictitious, it is interesting and refreshing to experience a story that has something more positive to say about humanity. And I found such an example just recently, in the form of Weekly Shonen Jump's new hit manga, Dr.Stone. As you likely know, Dr. Stone deals with the re-establishment of human society 3 millennia after a mysterious event turned all of humanity into stone. The story follows the ingenious Senku as he progresses the state of humanity through various applications of the series' main power system: science. And while the developing plot is really interesting and the continuous communication of fun scientific facts is incredibly endearing, there is one aspect that really caught my eye. After Senku and his friend Taiju are freed from their stone shackles, they basically immediately start working on freeing the rest of the population like it's a no-brainer. A general sense of, duh, we're the first ones out, of course we'll save them, reverberating through the early chapters. This is until they revive the series' first antagonist, the Pillar Man Tsukasa. A freakishly strong young man, Tsukasa proves incredibly useful for the revival effort. However, he recognizes and points out the unique position the few survivors find themselves in. Because they are tasked with the revival of humanity and are restarting it from point zero, they could, and perhaps should, think about who to actually bring back and in which direction to progress. In a way, they stand at the precipice of the only chance humanity will get at a fresh start. And, so argues Tsukasa, it's their obligation to carefully consider how to proceed. For example, he would only see the strong, young individuals revived, with the core effort being directed at building a naturalistic society comprised of the strongest and devoid of concepts like lawful ownership of land and corporate greed. This would also mean renouncing science and the progress it brings, essentially freezing humanity in the early tribal age. And while Tsukasa's plan is, to put it in professional terms, fucking stupid, his ideals do put the revival of all of humanity into question, which I think is, at least on a fundamental level, not entirely unreasonable. Senku and the others are in a situation where an ideological discussion about the revival would be kind of urgent, as every time they revive someone or reclaim a scientific invention, it is bound to have enormous consequences, as seen when they revived Tsukasa. His existence itself is a reminder that bringing back all of humanity means resurrecting all of the pain and misery it brings too. Tsukasa was molded by a society that exploits and beats down the weak in the name of arbitrary values and labels. And while Tsukasa's plan is overall rather naive and juvenile, the feelings and circumstances that led him to develop it are absolutely valid and will no doubt re-emerge if humanity is brought back as a whole. Senku's answer to this conundrum is incredibly straightforward. He likes science, so that's what he'll do, which, at the time, can seem like a bit of a waste of an interesting discourse. However, Inagaki clearly had more in mind with this idea, as it soon returns in the fantastic and heartbreaking story of Senku's adopted father, Byakuya Ishigami. As an astronaut, he set off into the stars and beyond for the sake of science, causing him and his team to be spared of petrification as they were not on Earth at the time it happened. This essentially makes them a proto-version of Senku's group, with the difference being that rather than working directly towards an attempted revival, they instead have to prepare both materials and knowledge to be passed down until the attempt can be made. And it's here where Inagaki reintroduces the question of whether or not a full revival is even necessary or reasonable. Or rather, he immediately presents the answer by ways of Byakuya's words and actions. The entirety of the space team's efforts hinges on the hope that one day, someone, specifically Senku, will awaken and begin rebuilding civilization. For this, Byakuya goes through extreme lengths, collecting as many valuable resources to give the reawakened a head start, leaving his offspring with 100 stories containing important knowledge, and even leaving behind a disc with recordings. This would, very reasonably, seem like an arduous and ultimately fruitless task. How can he possibly hope for the myriad of coincidences necessary for anyone to awake and find all of this to happen? And that's just the thing. Logically, the chances of any of this working out are infinitely slim. But because Byakuya believed not just in his son, but in the human race, for him, his efforts being useful was pretty much a certainty. And it's this belief and confidence which is at the heart of Dr. Stone as a whole. Both Senku and Byakuya present an outlook on humanity that presents curiosity, ambition, and potential as inherent to being human. It expresses itself as a belief in science, but the core idea is that humanity will always work towards progress and understanding. Just like Senku says, science is unstoppable and will always reappear, no matter how many setbacks it endures and how many times it's reset. Whether it be culture like games and songs, or science like electricity and light, these things will never be truly lost. Sure, the physical carriers of this stuff might disappear, but as long as one human is still alive, they live on as a memory and can, under right conditions, be reclaimed. And if that isn't possible, humanity will simply create new versions, evolved out of that memory. In essence, Senku and Byakuya believe that because of humanity's inherent desire to understand, to experiment, and to progress, the reclamation of society is basically inevitable. And I find this idea so incredibly endearing. It, in a way, is an appreciation of humanity and all its glory and gore. As Senku shows to the monkeys, the nature of science, the continuous, diligent method by which knowledge is obtained, is an inherently human trait, the thing that puts us above and beyond any other living species. The cruelties and pain we create are also part of this humanity. The story clearly acknowledges that. But in the face of the magnificence of human curiosity and our never-ending drive to understand ourselves and the world around us, it is Senku and Byakuya's duty to bring back humanity, both the good and the bad. Because while certainly there is a lot of bad, those are all problems our drive and science can and will eventually solve and make it all worth it, according to them. And I think that this is beautifully illustrated in one of my favorite scenes from the manga, Byakuya's death. As he, old and the last survivor of his team, collects precious metals in the river at night, his legs give in and he collapses headfirst into the pitch-black water of the river. And yet, there is not a single billionth of a second spent lamenting how he goes out. Instead, he is happy. Happy that, while he shall look up to the sky never again, he can at least see the starry night reflected in his watery grave. Despite being submerged in the dark fleetingness of humanity, despite his gaze never reaching upwards again, Byakuya finds happiness in the knowledge that the starlight he sees reflected in his final moments will be seen and explored by the unsatiable human spirit, a spirit that cannot be reset, that cannot be halted, and that moves forward evermore. And so, Tsukasa's question is giving a counter. It doesn't matter who Senku or him decide to revive and how they decide to rule. Humanity will always bounce back and will always chase the stars. Humanity will always reclaim society and science, because that's what humanity does. Tsukasa had already lost before he even opened his mouth. Whether or not you personally agree with this outlook, or even this interpretation, is a completely different story, of course. But I think that having a story be this unabashedly optimistic in its view of humanity during a time when pessimism is generally high just feels incredibly refreshing and is honestly a really engaging discourse within the series, and one that I'm excited to see more of. Thank you for watching, subscribe if you haven't yet, ring the bell, yada yada yada, all the things. Take care and be safe, I'll see you all next time.